Shropshire.
After 12 every day, we give you the chance to meet someone in or from or connected with Shropshire who's done interesting things, who's got interesting stories, interesting views, points, things to say. We call it the cool seat. It's like the antithesis of the hot seat because we learn a lot, but no one gets a grilling, if you see what I mean. In the cool seat today is Ellis Ware. Ellis founded Ranglebox. It's based in Shropshire. He joins me on the show now, live from London. Ellis, good afternoon. Thanks for being in the cool seat today.
Thanks for having me. How are you?
I'm okay. What is Ranglebox, first of all? Introduce Ranglebox to people who are unfamiliar with it.
Okay, so Ranglebox is what I fondly call my side hustle. Ranglebox, I mean, let's start with the silly sounding name. It's the coolest thing ever. We're in the cool seat, right? So it's that was sarcasm, if you couldn't tell. It's the letter R before angle and box, because I once wanted to design and develop a right angle gearbox, and it sounded cool, whatever anyway. So it was a thing when it was cool at the time.
Okay.
But yeah, Ranglebox is it was sort of my I guess manifestation of frustration, I guess. So my hobby, I'm sure we'll talk about it in a bit, is designing and building fighting robots, such as on Robot Wars and that sort of thing. And go back to 2014-15, which is when I started Ranglebox. I was quite frustrated about the kind of lack of availability of some of the common components that go into robotics projects like that.
Yeah.
And so I started looking into ways that I could source things for myself, and just kind of realized, well, if I'm getting X amount of things, maybe I'll get more, and maybe I could make it more convenient for other people in the community and offer them up on a little web store type thing. And that was literally it. It was very small, and to be honest, it's still quite small and humble. It's kind of part of a tight knit robot fighting community in the UK and a bit around the world.
How did you become part of that community? How did you get into the fighting robots thing?
Well, a bit like everyone in a certain demographic in the UK, I feel. I watched Robot Wars back in the late 90s and early 2000s. I've yet to meet many people of, as I say, a certain age range who don't at least have some recollection, if not remember loving it.
Yeah.
Back in the late 90s. So I watched it as a kid from like 3 or 4 years old and was absolutely obsessed by it. And I mean, we're fast forwarding, it went off air in 2003, I think, but fast forwarding something like 10 years, I was mid-teens, quite disillusioned with the education system and struggling a little bit. And I kind of rediscovered that whilst it isn't on TV, it still happens around the world in leisure centres and just competitions for the builders, by the builders, that sort of thing. So on a smaller scale, just not televised. And there was forums for it, and there was lots of YouTube videos for it. And so I just sort of literally joined the forum, annoyed everybody for a couple of years, trying to, I was that annoying 12, 13-year-old who was asking all the dumb questions, but eventually learned enough to be able to build my first featherweight, is what it's called. They're kind of different weight classes with the help of my dad. And that was 2012. And so fast forward to now, I've done 3 seasons of the Robot Wars rerun when it came on a couple of years back, and traveled to China several times to compete in their equivalent, hoping to go to the US one next year. So it's been a lot of kind of defining over the last 5-10 years for me.
Absolutely. What was it like? I mean, is Robot Wars on TV very different from the meetups in leisure centres that you've been going to?
In some ways, yes. In some ways, no. I feel like the pressure and the level is obviously much higher when it's on TV. The amount that people invest in terms of time and energy and money into building their machine that's going to go on BBC Two, obviously, that's a little bit different to having a laugh on a Saturday or a Sunday. The ones that are like that tend to be, they're a business model for the people who run them, and so there are a couple of people who've been doing those for the last 20 odd years. And kind of kept the community running. And so those are much less about causing catastrophic damage or whatever it might be. That is great television, because ultimately the show must go on and you need to be ready to fight in an hour's time. Yeah. Because it's a live audience. So a little bit different in that sense. It tends to be a little bit less violent, but ultimately the principles are the same and haven't really changed for over 2 decades now. It's all the same sort of stuff.
Tell us about the robots that you fought with.
So
the ones you've built and the most fearsome opponents.
So on Robot Wars, So that came back in, what was it? It was 2016, I think, and they did 3 shows. And it unfortunately went back off air in 2017, I think. So I first entered when I was 19 with a robot called Pulsar, and then I did a Pulsar 2, although I just called it Pulsar, and then I added magnets to it and painted a different color and called it Magnetar. So all kind of celestial body-based names. But yeah, so there were a number of machines that were pretty terrifying at the time. There was the one that I never fought, actually, that everybody always wanted me to fight, because we were kind of coming at the sport from 2 quite different angles, but considered 2 of the more kind of, I guess, I don't want to use the word high end, it sounds wrong, but most damaging machines. Robot called Carbide, that people will, if they're listening and they watch the show, they'll definitely know that name as well. The fight never happened before the show got, unfortunately, cancelled again. But maybe one day, if anyone who's got those powers is listening, I'm going to use this pedestal.
The different fighting robots have kind of different philosophies, if you like. Some are really big and heavy and brutal. Others are, as you say, like featherweight and nip around and try and disrupt everything. The Pulsar, Magnetar, what was their approach?
Yeah, so I'll preface that by saying, as you say, there's different weight classes. It's very much like boxing. And so what people don't realize is, firstly, that the machines that go on the TV shows are huge. Back in the day, they weighed up to 100 kilos, and in the modern day versions, it's 110.
Wow.
And these things comfortably get up to, a meter square in size. They're the size of coffee tables fighting each other, but they kind of look like RC cars. So they're big machines, and they go down to 75. There was once a 25 gram class, which is not very popular anymore, but 75 and 150 gram, like desktop handheld. But the big scale Pulsar and Magnetar, mine, they had what's called a drum spinner. So it's a flywheel weapon, effectively. So you spin a heavy thing really fast, stores a lot of kinetic energy, and then, in honestly not much more technical terminology than this, you bump it into the other guy and hope it breaks them. That's the principle. So, I mean, but to put it into perspective, the weapon on Magnetar, the final version I did for the TV show, that was a 21 kilogram mass, so it's still pretty heavy, and that was spinning at 250 miles an hour, about 8,000, 9,000 RPM. So that's it's about the equivalent energy of 2 big rifle rounds. It's a lot of energy.
I did watch all of those 3 from most recent series, and if I'd have known I was going to be interviewing you 3 years on, I'd paid a whole bunch more attention. But if I I have a memory of either you tearing chunks from the underside of something, or flipping things over.
Yes. So the orientation of the flywheel weapon on my designs is a vertical spinner as against a horizontal. The other popular way around.
Yeah.
So a vertical spinner, the idea is, especially with my machines, was that they would kind of scoop underneath the opponent, get underneath them with a sharp blade, kind of like a plow on the front. And then once you're underneath, the weapon spins vertically, so it would impact them from below, with the direction going upwards. Yeah. And the good thing about that is that those sort of energy transfer is quite efficient, because equal and opposite reaction, you hit something upwards and you go downwards. So you've got the sturdy kind of the floor of the arena, the bulletproof arena, behind you, and that stabilizing your machine. Thus, a lot of the energy goes into the opponent and sends them flying upwards in the air. So that was the principle. Pretty brutal. Although I liked to try and take a relatively technical approach to it. I was, especially back in the day, I was exploring new technologies and things to try and get the most weight to cost optimization and performance optimization as well.
Let's talk about that for a bit, because if remembering those series of Robot Wars, when they introduced the teams, you'd often get you'd have a pair of twins, both of whom have got an MSc in mechanical engineering at the age of 15, and they're and helping out with the team is their father, who's also a professor of this kind of thing. You're an entirely self-taught engineer.
I am, yeah, and as a direct result of robots, really. So I was living abroad in Spain, as it happens, from age 7 to 18. My parents moved out there when I was young. And so I was part of the education system there. And I just found I was coming up to kind of early to mid-teens, and as I mentioned before, getting quite increasingly disillusioned with the education system as a whole and whatnot. And I had lots of online friends, and so I sort of drifted away from that and realized that I could learn a lot and get a lot of satisfaction from what I could learn online. And with the power of the internet, it's kind of incredible how much it hasn't changed society, actually, considering we have the entire wealth of the human race at our of knowledge, sorry, at our fingertips now. But basically, I just watched a lot, and I can't understate this, a lot of YouTube videos about all sorts of things, as well as getting hands-on and building these machines and striving to gain skills that would allow me to build more competitive robots, forced me to then learn more, and it was kind of quite a satisfying cycle, and it kind of went from there, really. And then as I got into it more and more, I learned how to use 3D design software. I learned how to make more exotic and precise parts. I learned how to talk to suppliers, and later on for Robot Wars, I couldn't fund that. I didn't have a job, so I had to get on the phone and learn how to speak to human beings and try and get sponsorship and that sort of thing. So not only has it been an incredible education from a engineering standpoint, but also in a life sense, gaining time management, financial management, people management, and project management sort of skills, along with the electro-mechanical engineering stuff. But yeah, I'm entirely self-taught. I dropped out of school at 15, 16, and I've been able to substitute it with robots.
What would have kept you in school? What did the education system? What did schools do wrong, essentially, that didn't maintain your interest? Because there've got to be young people now who like the 15, 16-year-old Ellis, who talented, intelligent, capable, but they're just not engaged with what's put in front of them.
Yeah, it wasn't really any one specific thing. I just found that I wasn't being motivated or particularly not necessarily even challenged, but just I wasn't getting a satisfaction from the amount of time. School is basically a full-time job, except you don't get paid, right?
Yeah.
So,
it's true.
It's true. Yeah. I mean, and if you don't get much out of it, then it can be, especially with all of the pressure that is sort of instilled in young people, especially young people who show signs of having prospects in certain skill areas or whatever it might be. There's a lot of pressure to do well and to achieve, and so I just found that I couldn't get what I wanted, which was to learn stuff that I considered cool, basically. And part of this would have been, it was a small town school in fairly rural Spain. So maybe it would have been different if I were in the UK at that time in a city centre or something. But I think it's true in general. I wanted to specialize, I think, from a younger age than is maybe sort of expected from the education system, because ultimately it needs to try and cater to all balances.
Yeah.
And so I guess the bit that I ended up doing by accident, and obviously I say all of this knowing I'm very fortunate that I got parents who are supportive enough to even consider the idea of me dropping out of school to pursue my other interests. I'm not unaware of that. But I'm very fortunate in the sense that all of those hobbies that I had, including ones that weren't engineering and robots, were all things that if you ever got good enough at them, they potentially turn into monetizable skills.
Yes.
And I think that's the important point, really. So before robots, for me, it was animation, computer like 2D animation or video and graphics, that sort of thing. And then video editing became quite a serious thing for me. I did some stuff, websites, and then eventually kind of landed and settled on the engineering stuff, maintaining those other interests. But all of those things, fortunately, if I got proficient enough at them, in theory, you can see that one day someone might pay me to do them. And I guess that's the bit that I'm quite lucky with. But I guess if there's a message that I'd like to try and kind of learn from my experience, is that the education system, firstly, I would never say to anyone, quit school. In fact, I think I would probably, if I felt like it was an option, I would have actually stayed in school and gone through the system. And I say that because of all the other aspects, right? It's not only about education, it's about life experiences, meeting people, social aspects, that sort of thing, which go in the self-taught route in your bedroom for 5 years, I will admit, doesn't necessarily cater to all of those other things. But I think what happens is people focus on, you need to gain an education, a formal education, in order to succeed. it's kind of drilled into kids. I don't know. I think more so now than ever, perhaps, that if you don't get the piece of paper at the end of it that says that you are skilled in X, Y, Z, then you're going to be a failure. And it's that black and white. But we all know after about 3 years getting out of uni or school that life isn't like that, unfortunately. But we still sort of have that kind of tone. And there's a huge amount of pressure there. When I think what maybe the thing to consider is just that the goal shouldn't be, in my opinion, to get the piece of paper or the document that says you need to that you have those skill sets. It should be rather just the goal is just to learn. And if the goal is just to learn, then there are other methods, especially in 2020, such as with the internet or with YouTube or through getting hands-on, that might be more effective and faster and more natural for you, that you then might be able to use later in life. Basically, what I'm saying is, if school isn't for you, it's not necessarily the end of the road. It sounds incredibly obvious, but that's been my experience.
Oh, good. The fire alarm stopped. It's just nothing.
I didn't know if that was a beat to say stop talking, Ellis.
No. You're quite nice. Like just that red light comes on and says we've enough. No, what would you say? What would you say either to the 14-year-old you then, Ellis, or what would you say to the parents or the grandparents of teenagers who at the moment are really, really into what they're really, really into, and they're watching videos about it, they're working on it, they're working on their hobbies, or they're into what they do away from school, maybe not doing so well or so bothered about school themselves? What would you say to the young you, and what would you say to parents, family members of the people who are the young you now?
I would just try and instill the idea that the goal should be to unfortunately, in some senses, in this world, in order to quote unquote succeed by most people's definition of that, you need to have learned certain things that make you employable. And that's kind of the first thing when you're a young adult. You need to get a foothold in the world. And I'm not saying make it all about the money, but simply if the goal is to become a skilled, well-rounded young adult, then the mission should be to learn. And if you're learning quickly and efficiently and you're enjoying it through means that aren't the beaten path, such as formal education, then just do whatever you can to make sure you aren't stifling that, I suppose, would be the message. As I say, for me, I was very lucky in some senses that my interests have led to a career in engineering, because I was able to use that enthusiasm to learn, and then was able to use Robot Wars as a platform to propel myself and have that start in a career without the paperwork to say that I have those skills. For example, and this might well upset a lot of people, and I really don't mean it this way, but say your hobby is a sport, and you're absolutely dedicated to it and you love it, and there's nothing wrong with that. And that's obviously very normal. Unfortunately, though, in the real world, unless you're an absolutely amazing tennis player or football player or whatever it might be, or any other things, your interests aren't above those sort of relatively saturated levels, then unfortunately, it's not necessarily something that is monetizable. Whereas if you're learning something and you're enjoying something that is outside of education, and you can see that 3, 4, 5, 10 years down the line, if you've got good enough, someone might pay you to do it, and it's realistic, just do whatever you can, just bear that in mind, and that maybe should be given a higher priority than simply getting the exams. Because you never know. As I say, my experience was that ended up being more important than the bits of paper, at least thus far in life.
But you describe Ranglebox as your side hustle. It's based in Shropshire. You're living and working in London. What do you do the rest of the time? Tell us a bit more about your career in engineering.
So I've been working at a design agency in central London for the last 3.5 years. So we do product development. And my job title is electro-mechanical engineer. So it's almost entirely because that's what a fighting robot is. It's effectively a one-off bespoke electro-mechanical product. But what I do on a daily basis ranges significantly. There's quite a lot of basis in manufacturing, and actually that ties into Ranglebox as well. I'll come back to that. It's a funny story. But basically the skills that I learned in fighting robots have allowed me to kind of convert those skills into, and some of the same problem solving approaches and things apply very well to product development. So on one day I might be doing a tech kind of product knickknack, something relatively simple. Another day it might be a children's toy, and another day it might be a pretty complicated medical product with lots of moving parts and kind of everything in between. So that's been a massive education for me as well, learning on the job, and being given the opportunity to kind of get started in that. And suddenly now it's 3.5 years later. Don't know how that happened.
Tell me about the Ranglebox manufacturing story. What happened?
So I was just getting into it, something like 2015. And where I started was very specifically actually the gearboxes and motors that propel smaller fighting robots.
Yeah.
So one of the common things people do is they go to Argos or Homebase or whatever, and they buy the cheapest cordless drill they can find, like a 12-volt drill for 20 quid or something like that.
Yeah.
You gut it, and you can take the electric motor and the drive system out of that. And if you think about it, a cordless drill's got enough power to hurt your wrist if you jam it in the wall or something. And so if you were to put a wheel on it and put a battery on it, it would make a pretty good robot drive. And so what I wanted to do was make a pretty version of that, more robust, more easily mountable, whatever, more premium version of that. So that's where I started. So I looked around the internet and settled on lots of Chinese suppliers. And I remember once I designed a gearbox that would be my dream gearbox, sent it to China to get some quotes, and they came back and said, yeah, that would be 10 grand until 12 weeks. Oh, okay. Okay, so I didn't understand. Eventually I found a supplier who's willing to work with me. And long story short, after 100 emails and developing my dream gearbox, I was 18. I didn't know what I was doing. And unfortunately, they sold it to all of my competitors.
Oh, no.
So that was, yeah, they did. That was, turns out if you want to get a custom made thing, then custom made with that level of quality and kind of bespoke nature, they can't make 30 of them for the price I was paying. I should have known that. So unfortunately, there was a huge email chain, and they sent their drawings saying, hey, we're making these, do you want them? So about a week before I launched them, they went on Facebook and everyone could see what I'd been up to. So that was a life experience. Yes. I learned a lot about, but I mean, I'm painting it in a bad picture. I love manufacturing in China now, and that's how I make all my parts that are custom made in China and stuff now. And I've visited the country 9 times or something, both for work and hobby.
Wow.
But yeah, I cut my teeth in a pretty aggressive way, let's say. Learned my lesson very early on. Protect your designs, kids.
Yeah, absolutely. Intellectual property, it's a thing. Exactly. Because we're talking about robots, just one final question, Ellis. Whether it's a Robot Wars competitor, or whether it's a fictional robot from film or television, your favourite robot of all time?
Oh no! Don't do that to me. See, the problem is, I am definitely a nerd, right? I mean, there's no doubt about it. I'm not very good at having favorite things like that.
Right.
I think if I had to, though, now I think about it, and I'm glad I thought of a cool one. I'm going to go with Spot or Spot Mini from Boston Dynamics. And those, you've probably seen the viral videos. It's a little yellow-colored robotic dog type thing.
Oh, the dog. Yes.
Yeah. So those are from a company in, I think, Boston Dynamics. They do lots of things with, I think, the US military. So they've got infinite money. And they have, over the last 10, 15 years, developed these incredible humanoid and kind of animal mimicking robots, and have been kind of on the cutting edge of that technology for a long time. And they you can now, for a lot of money, buy your very own robotic dog. And it's good as well. It's not one of those rubbish ones from Argos or something, but probably Spot or Spot Mini.
Spot the robotic dog. And it's been absolutely fun. There's really inspiring, apart from anything else, talking to you about your experience and what you've done. Ellis Ware of Ranglebox, thank you very much for being in the cool seat today.
Thanks for having me.
Cheers, Ellis. Good to talk to you. Thanks a lot. Thank you. Bye-bye. Just gone 12:30.
BBC Radio Shropshire with Adam Green.